Dying tastes like copper and cheap hospital bleach. I know, because I choked on it while my family argued in the hallway over who got my car, before my heart monitor even flatlined. I had bled my bank accounts, my credit, and my health dry to keep them afloat, and my reward was a solitary, rotting end. But then, my eyes snapped open. I was back. 5 years back, and this time, when they came begging for my blood, I decided to keep it. Watching them drown, it was the best thing I ever did. Breath hitched in my throat, coming out as a violent, tearing gasp. I threw my hands over my chest, waiting for the familiar, agonizing spike of pain in my lungs. I waited for the wet rattle, the smell of antiseptic, the dim fluorescent hum of the hospice ward. Nothing. My fingers gripped fabric. Not the paper-thin, scratchy hospital blanket that smelled of industrial detergent and despair, but cotton. Thick, soft cotton. I opened my eyes. Dust motes danced in a shaft of morning sunlight, piercing through cheap plastic vertical blinds. A poster of a band I hadn't listened to in years hung slightly crooked on the eggshell-colored wall. This was my old bedroom. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I scrambled backward, my back hitting the solid wood of the headboard. My skin was damp with sweat, but it wasn't the feverish, sickly sweat of a dying woman. I looked down at my hands. They were full. The skin wasn't pulled taut over protruding knuckles. The nails weren't bruised and brittle. They were young hands, healthy hands. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up, displaying a cracked screen protector and a date that stole the air from my lungs. Tuesday, October 12th, 2021. I stared at it until the numbers burned into my retinas. 5 years ago? 5 years before the diagnosis. 5 years before Liam's catastrophic mistake drained my life savings, before my parents pressured me into co-signing a loan that would financially cripple me. Before the stress ate my immune system alive and left me rotting in a bed while they went on a cruise paid for by the life insurance policy I didn't know they'd taken out on me. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes. It wasn't a dream. The air smelled like my mother's burnt toast, and the neighbors cut grass. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of the morning news anchor droning from the television downstairs. It was violently, aggressively normal. A phantom ache throbbed in my chest. I remembered the exact moment I died. I remembered the sound of my sister, Harper, laughing loudly outside my hospital door, complaining to my mother that the cafeteria coffee was terrible and asking if they could leave yet because she had a nail appointment. I remembered the monitor slowing, the terrifying sensation of slipping underwater, the desperate silent scream for someone, anyone, to hold my hand. Nobody came in. Bile rose in the back of my throat. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The carpet was rough against my bare soles. Every sensation was magnified, sharp enough to cut. I walked to the mirror hanging on the back of my door. The woman staring back at me was 26, exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes from working 50-hour weeks. But she was alive. "Nora!" My mother's voice pierced the floorboards. "Nora, get down here! Your brother is here and he needs to talk to us!" My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. October 12th, 2021, the day of the first ruin. I remembered this day with eidetic clarity. Liam, the golden boy, the untouchable prince of our suburban castle, had shown up at 7 a.m, smelling of stale sweat and expensive gin. He had been working as a junior financial advisor for exactly 11 months. And he had, as he so delicately put it in my previous life, borrowed $45,000 from a client's account to cover a series of spectacularly bad day trades. In the first life, I ran downstairs. I held his hand while he cried. I listened to my mother hyperventilate. I listened to my father beg me to use the $50,000 I had painstakingly saved since I was 16, my down payment for a house, my ticket out of this suffocating town, to save my brother from federal prison. "He's your blood, Nora," my father had said, his grip bruising my shoulder. "You can save up again. He'll lose his whole future." I had transferred the money by noon. Liam never paid me back. Instead, he bought a new BMW 3 months later. I looked at my healthy reflection. The dark circles under my eyes suddenly looked less like exhaustion and more like war paint. I didn't feel the angelic, forgiving warmth of a second chance. I felt a cold, hard knot of pure spite forming in my gut, dense as a dying star. I stripped off my pajamas and pulled on a pair of jeans and a heavy gray sweater. I took my time. I brushed my teeth, staring at my pink gums, feeling the sturdy enamel of my teeth. I ran a brush through my thick hair. Downstairs, the murmur of voices grew more frantic. "Nora!" My father's voice this time, a bark of authority. I walked out of my room and stood at the top of the stairs. The stairs were covered in an ugly beige runner that always smelled faintly of wet dog. I walked down them slowly. Each step felt like a drumbeat. I turned the corner into the kitchen. The scene was perfectly replicated, a grotesque diorama of my past trauma. My father, Richard, was leaning heavily against the faux granite island, his face tight. My mother, Barbara, was wringing a dish towel in her hands, her eyes already pooling with practiced, strategic tears. And there was Liam, sitting at the small breakfast table, his head buried in his hands. He was wearing a wrinkled Ralph Lauren button-down. His leg bounced up and down in a rapid, nervous rhythm, the sole of his Italian leather loafer squeaking faintly against the linoleum. "There you are," my father snapped, looking up at me. "Sit down. Your brother is in trouble." I walked over to the coffee maker. The pot was half full, the liquid inside looking burnt and black. I pulled a mug from the cabinet, the one with a chip on the rim, and poured myself a cup. The smell of cheap, scorched Folgers hit my nose. I didn't look at them. I just stirred in a splash of milk. "Nora, please!" my mother pleaded, her voice trembling perfectly on the last syllable. "Pay attention. This is serious." I turned around, leaning my hip against the counter, holding the warm mug in both hands. The heat seeped into my palms, grounding me in the reality of the present. "I'm listening," I said. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. It lacked the usual high-pitched anxiety, the eager-to-please tremor that had defined my entire 20s. It was flat. Dead. Liam dragged his hands down his face. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked pathetic. In my past life, my heart had bled for him. Now, looking at the slight puffiness of his face, the way his eyes darted around the room looking for an exit, I just felt a profound, overwhelming wave of disgust. "I messed up, Nor," Liam choked out, his voice cracking. "I messed up really, really bad. Here we go. I took some money from the firm," Liam said, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a rush, as if saying them faster would lessen the impact. "Just a temporary transfer. I had a tip on a biotech stock. It was supposed to triple by Friday. I was going to put the principal back before the quarterly audit on Monday. Nobody would have known." "But it didn't triple," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. It tasted like ash, but I swallowed it anyway. Liam flinched at my tone. He was used to me rushing to his side, rubbing his back. No, the FDA pulled their trial approval. The stock tanked. It's gone. 45 grand, Nora. It's gone. A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed a low, vibrating note. My mother let out a small, wounded noise and covered her mouth. Oh, Liam, my sweet boy, what are we going to do? She turned her gaze to my father. Richard? My father ran a hand over his receding hairline. He looked at Liam, then, slowly, deliberately, his eyes slid over to me. I watched the machinery of his mind work. It was transparent now. He was calculating the exact amount of emotional leverage he needed to apply. We have to make him whole before Monday, my father said, his voice dropping into its lowest, most serious register. The reasonable patriarch voice. If the firm finds out, they won't just fire him. They'll press charges. Embezzlement is a felony. His life will be over. I can't go to jail, Dad, Liam whimpered. It was a good performance. The slight tremble in the chin, the wide, terrified eyes. I wouldn't survive it. Nobody is going to jail, my father said firmly, never taking his eyes off me. We just need to put the money back. Liam will pay it off over time. It's a loan. Family helps family. The word family felt like a cockroach crawling across my tongue. I remembered the smell of the hospice room again. The agonizing, solitary silence. We don't have that kind of cash liquid, Richard, my mother said, stepping directly into her assigned role in this play. The business took a hit last quarter, and with the mortgage... She trailed off, looking at me. Now came the pivot. Nora, my father said, softening his voice, making it sound almost gentle. You've been saving for a house. You showed me the statement last month. You have over $50,000 in that high-yield account. There it was, the demand wrapped in a polite observation. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A deeply ingrained Pavlovian response kicked in. The urge to say yes, to fix the tension, to be the good daughter, to buy their temporary approval with my sweat and blood. I could feel the invisible strings pulling at my limbs, trying to force me to nod, to pull out my phone and open my banking app. It was terrifying how strong the conditioning was. My chest tightened, and my breath grew shallow. But then, my fingers gripped the chipped edge of the ceramic mug. The sharp, physical sensation cut through the psychological fog. I looked at Liam. He wasn't looking at me with gratitude. Under the tears, in the tight set of his jaw, there was entitlement. He expected this. He felt he deserved my money because he was the sun, the star, and I was just the reliable, boring bank vault. I set the coffee mug down on the counter. The ceramic clinked loudly against the formica. No. The word hung in the air, singular and sharp as a guillotine blade. My father blinked, leaning forward slightly as if he had misheard me. What did you say? I said no, I repeated. My voice didn't shake. I felt a strange, cold adrenaline pooling in my stomach. The sweaty palms were there, the racing heart, but my mind was violently clear. I'm not giving him the money! Liam's head snapped up. The pathetic, whimpering boy vanished in a millisecond. His brow furrowed, his eyes darkening. Nora, did you not hear me? I'll go to prison. I heard you perfectly, Liam, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. You stole $45,000 from an elderly client to gamble on the stock market. That is a crime. Actions have consequences. My mother gasped, dropping her dish towel on the floor. It landed with a soft, pathetic slap. Nora, how can you say that? He's your brother. He's a thief, I corrected her, my tone conversational. And he's 24 years old. He's an adult. I am not draining 6 years of my life savings. Money I worked double shifts for. Money I skipped vacations and meals for. To cover up a felony. My father's face flushed a deep, mottled red. The veins in his neck stood out. He slammed his fist down on the island. The sugar bowl rattled. "You selfish, ungrateful little girl," he roared. The volume was meant to cow me, to make me shrink into myself like a beaten dog. "After everything we have done for you? After we put a roof over your head and fed you?" "You're my parents," I shot back, the icy calm finally cracking just enough to let the raw, feral anger bleed through. "Providing a roof and food was your legal obligation, not a favor. And I have been paying rent to live in this house since the day I turned 18. I owe you nothing, and I certainly owe him nothing." I pointed at Liam. His mask was fully off now. His upper lip curled into a sneer. "You're just jealous," Liam spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You've always been jealous of me, because you're a mediocre receptionist and I actually have a career. A real future. You'd rather see me burn than help me." I almost laughed. A real future. In my past life, his real future consisted of blowing my money, getting fired 2 years later for showing up drunk, and moving back into the basement while I worked myself to death. "Yeah, if you have such a brilliant career, Liam, go to a bank. Get a personal loan." "Oh, wait." I tilted my head, feigning sympathy. "Your credit score is in the low 5s because you maxed out 3 credit cards trying to buy bottle service to impress girls who don't know your name. No bank will touch you." "That is enough!" my mother shrieked, stepping between us, holding her hands up as if to shield her golden boy from my words. She glared at me, her eyes hard and hateful. "If you do not help your brother right now, Nora, you are no longer a part of this family. Do you understand me? You are dead to us." The words hit me. They were meant to be the ultimate weapon, the final strike to break my spirit. But they didn't know I had already died for them. I already knew what being dead to them felt like. It felt like freedom. I looked at my mother, taking in the harsh lines around her mouth, the desperate, ugly panic in her eyes. "Okay," I said softly. The kitchen went dead silent. The threat had failed. They had no backup plan. I turned around, walked out of the kitchen, and started up the stairs. My legs felt light, hollowed out by the sheer force of what I had just done. Behind me, the silence broke into chaotic, overlapping shouting. My father cursing. Liam kicking a chair across the linoleum, the wood cracking against the wall. My mother sobbing, loud and performative. I didn't look back. I went into my room, pulled my battered duffel bag from under the bed, and started packing. I packed methodically, ignoring the muffled crashes and yelling echoing up through the floorboards. I didn't take everything. I left the posters, the cheap knickknacks they'd bought me for Christmases past, to make up for forgetting my actual birthdays. I only took what mattered: my clothes, my laptop, my passport, and the lockbox containing my birth certificate and social security card. The zipper of the duffel bag sounded loud, a final metallic zip of finality. I threw the strap over my shoulder. It was heavy, digging into my collarbone, but I welcomed the weight. When I walked back down the stairs, the house was eerily quiet. I found them in the living room. My father was pacing the length of the worn oriental rug, his phone pressed to his ear, his face grim. My mother was sitting on the sofa, clutching a throw pillow to her chest, her makeup smeared. Liam was gone. My father paused his pacing as I reached the bottom step. He lowered the phone. "Where do you think you're going?" "Out," I said simply. You walk out that door, you don't come back. He threatened again, though the conviction in his voice was thinning. He was trying to call my bluff. I know, I said. I pulled my keys from my pocket. The jingle was the only sound in the room. Good luck with the auditors on Monday. I didn't wait to see his reaction. I opened the front door, stepped out into the crisp October air, and pulled it shut behind me. The lock clicked. I walked to my 2010 Honda Civic parked on the street. I threw the bag into the passenger seat, climbed in, and shut the door. The moment the heavy car door closed, sealing me in the quiet cabin, a violent shudder ripped through my body. My hands, which had been so steady in the kitchen, began to tremble uncontrollably. I gripped the faux leather steering wheel, squeezing until my knuckles ached, trying to ground myself. It wasn't a clean victory. It wasn't the triumphant cinematic moment I might have imagined. It was messy, nauseating, and devastating. I was amputating a rotten limb without anesthesia. I was mourning the family I had spent my whole life desperately wishing they could be, while simultaneously feeling a vicious, dark satisfaction at watching the parasites they actually were begin to panic. I shoved the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine sputtered to life. I drove. I didn't know where I was going, so I just drove toward the city center. I found a diner I used to frequent during college, a place that smelled of stale fry grease and strong coffee. I slid into a booth in the back, the red vinyl seats cracked and patched with duct tape. I ordered black coffee and a plate of fries, staring blankly out the window at the passing traffic. My phone, resting face down on the laminate table, began to vibrate. It buzzed, stopped, and immediately buzzed again. It danced across the table like an angry, mechanical insect. I picked it up. 32 missed calls, a barrage of texts. The first few were from my mother. Guilt trips heavily laden with emotional blackmail. How could you do this to us? After I carried you for 9 months. Liam is talking about doing something drastic. If he hurts himself, his blood is on your hands, Nora. I read the last one twice. The old Nora would have had a panic attack, would have turned the car around, crying, apologizing, offering her bank account routing number. The new Nora felt a cold, clinical detachment. Liam loved himself far too much to ever leave a scratch on his own skin. It was just another play. Then came the texts from Harper. My older sister, the one who lived in the city and only came home when she needed laundry done or a free meal. She must have gotten the frantic phone call from our mother. You are a disgusting, selfish monster. Who the hell do you think you are? You better fix this right now. You're ruining Mom's health. I thought about Harper in the hallway of the hospice, laughing about her nail appointment while my lungs filled with fluid. I blocked her number. Then, I blocked my mother. Then my father. Then Liam. The silence that followed was profound. The constant buzzing anxiety that had lived at the base of my skull for 26 years, the fear of displeasing them, the exhausting effort of anticipating their needs, just stopped. I opened my banking app. The screen loaded, displaying my savings account balance. $52,410.88. The money was still there. My future was still there. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a lifetime. Over the next 48 hours, I lived out of a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I went to my job at the dental clinic, filed paperwork, smiled at patients, and lived in a strange, surreal bubble of calm. I knew the storm was raging, but I was outside of it. On Monday afternoon, the bubble popped, not with a bang, but with a satisfying, quiet hiss. I was on my lunch break, sitting in my car, when my phone chimed. It was an email from Sarah, a mutual friend who worked in HR at Liam's firm. I had sent her a message the night before, asking if she wanted to get drinks later in the week, acting completely normal. Her reply popped up on my screen. Nora, I am so sorry. I don't even know how to tell you this. It's absolutely insane here today. Liam was just escorted out of the building by the police in handcuffs. Management found out he was embezzling from client accounts. It's bad, Nora. They're pressing full charges. They're talking federal court. I stared at the glowing screen. I read the words, escorted out, in handcuffs, over and over. I pictured the golden boy, in his expensive stolen suits, being frog-marched past his colleagues. I pictured my father's face when he got the phone call. I pictured my mother realizing that no amount of performative weeping could charm a federal judge. Without my money to plug the hole, the dam had burst. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I sat in the quiet of my old Honda, the smell of cheap vanilla air freshener hanging in the air, and I let the dark, heavy satisfaction settle into my bones. The dominoes had started to fall. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger to destroy them. All I had to do was stand back and watch their true colors do the work for me. Tuesday morning tasted like stale peppermint and adrenaline. My windshield wipers dragged a squeaking, futile arc across the glass, smearing city grime and October rain into a gray blur. I parked behind the dental clinic, killing the engine. The silence in my car was heavy. I sat there for 10 minutes, watching the rain bead on the hood, waiting for the familiar, crushing weight of guilt to crush my chest. It never came. Instead, a hollow, buzzing anticipation vibrated in my ribs. The clinic smelled of wintergreen, rubbing alcohol, and old magazines. I clocked in, tied my hair back, and started organizing the morning files. It was exactly 9:15 a.m. when the heavy glass front door slammed open, hitting the rubber wall stop with a violent crack. My mother stood in the threshold. She looked entirely unhinged. Barbara always prided herself on appearances. Her hair meticulously sprayed into a stiff helmet, her makeup a flawless, impenetrable mask. Today, her raincoat was half-buttoned, her hair plastered flat to her skull by the rain, and black mascara tracked deep, jagged lines into the powder on her cheeks. "Nora!" she shrieked. The two elderly patients in the waiting room flinched, lowering their magazines. I didn't shrink behind the high reception counter. I stood up slowly, planting my feet flat on the industrial carpet. "Keep your voice down, Mom. This is a medical facility." "Where is the money?" She lunged toward the desk, her manicured nails digging into the laminated wood. Her breath smelled faintly of stale wine and copper-sharp panic. "Liam is in a holding cell, Nora. A cell. Do you know what they do to boys like him in there? The bail is set at 100,000. We need 10% in cash. We need it right now." I looked down at her hands. They were trembling violently. In my previous life, those shaking hands would have shattered my resolve. I would have felt the frantic urge to soothe her, to fix the ugly reality breaking her perfect world. Now, I just noticed the chipped red polish on her index finger. "I told you on Sunday," I said, my voice dropping to a low, flat cadence. "I am not paying for his mistakes. Go to a bail bondsman. Put up the house." "We can't put up the house!" she hissed, leaning over the counter, her voice dropping into a venomous whisper. "Your father took out a second mortgage last year to cover his business losses. We have zero equity. You are his only hope. If you don't wire that money to the lawyer right now, my son is going to rot in prison, and it will be your fault." "My son? Not your brother. My son." "Then he rots." I said. Barbara physically recoiled, as if I had slapped her across the face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The absolute, unshakable certainty in my eyes must have terrified her. She was used to bending me until I snapped. She didn't know how to handle someone who was already broken and rebuilt out of concrete. "Dr. Evans is going to call the police if you don't leave," I told her, gesturing to the hallway where my boss was already peering nervously around the corner. "Go home, Mom." She stared at me, searching my face for the daughter she had conditioned to be a doormat. When she found nothing but cold, blank slate, her expression twisted into something ugly and feral. "You are dead to me," she spat, her voice trembling with genuine hatred. "Don't you ever come back." She turned and marched out, the glass door swinging shut behind her. I sat back down. My hands were shaking, a delayed physical reaction, but my mind was crystal clear. The umbilical cord was finally, brutally severed. That afternoon, during my lunch break, I walked into a real estate office 3 blocks away. I didn't want to rent. Renting meant instability. Renting meant they could find me, pressure a landlord, cause a scene. I needed a fortress. I found a modest, 2-bedroom townhouse on the opposite side of the city. It was outdated, the carpets a tragic shade of seafoam green, the kitchen cabinets smelling faintly of old grease and pine cleaner. But it was solid brick. It was cheap, and it was going to be entirely mine. I put down $40,000, cash. When the escrow officer handed me the heavy brass keys 2 weeks later, the metal was cold against my palm. I stood in the center of the empty living room, breathing in the dust and the stale air, and cried. I didn't cry for my family. I cried for the 26-year-old girl who had died in a hospital bed, terrified and unloved, just so I could stand here today. By November, the cold had set in, biting and bitter. I bought a cheap space heater for the townhouse while I slowly painted the walls a warm, soft white. The physical labor was a balm. Peeling off decades of ugly floral wallpaper felt like shedding my own skin. With me out of the picture, the family dynamic had to rebalance. A parasite cannot survive without a host, and Barbara and Richard were rapidly running out of blood. So, they turned their sights on the only remaining target, Harper. Harper was 2 years older than me, a junior marketing executive who lived in a sleek downtown loft she couldn't actually afford. Her entire life was a carefully curated illusion of wealth, designer bags bought on high-interest credit, weekend brunches, aesthetic Instagram posts. She had avoided the family's mess for years by simply ignoring our parents' calls and letting me handle the dirty work. I was at a hardware store comparing the textures of different sanding blocks when my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. The caller ID was a random downtown number. I answered cautiously. "Nora?" It was Harper. Her voice was shrill, the edges frayed with an unfamiliar panic. "Who is this?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "Stop playing games. It's me. You blocked my number." A ragged exhale hissed through the speaker. "Listen, you need to fix this. Right now." I ran my thumb over the rough grit of a sanding block. "Fix what, Harper?" "Mom and Dad," she choked out. The background noise sounded like city traffic and wind. "They showed up at my apartment. They're demanding I take out a $30,000 personal loan to pay for Liam's defense attorney. They brought a stack of paperwork. Dad practically tried to physically force a pen into my hand." A dark, grim smile pulled at the corner of my mouth. "And what did you say?" "I said no. Obviously, I can't take on that kind of debt. It would ruin my debt-to-income ratio. I'm trying to upgrade my car next month." The sheer, brazen selfishness of her complaint was staggering. Liam was facing federal prison, and Harper was worried about the lease on a new Audi. But they won't leave me alone, Nora. Mom is calling my office. She left a sobbing voicemail on my manager's phone. You have the savings. Just pay them so they leave me alone. I bought a house, Harper. The money is gone. Dead silence on the line. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head, the sudden, horrifying realization that the designated safety net had packed up and left. You bought a house? She whispered. With Liam facing jail? You selfish bitch. Welcome to the front lines, I said, my tone mild, almost conversational. For 10 years, they bled me dry while you ignored my calls and told me I was too sensitive. Now, you're the only daughter left. Have fun with that. I hung up. I blocked the new number. I bought the sanding blocks, went home, and sanded my kitchen cabinets until my shoulders burned and my hands were coated in fine white dust. The physical exhaustion felt clean. Good. Over the next few weeks, the grapevine delivered fragmented updates like pieces of a slow-motion car crash. Without my money to secure a high-powered defense attorney, Liam was appointed a public defender who was vastly overworked. The embezzlement case was airtight. The firm had timestamps, IP addresses, and bank routing numbers, all leading directly to Liam's personal accounts. My parents, desperate and thrashing, began liquidating. They sold my father's beloved boat. They sold Barbara's jewelry. But it was a drop in the bucket against the civil suit the firm filed on top of the criminal charges. One evening, I was sitting on my newly thrifted sofa, eating takeout noodles from a carton. The rain was drumming a steady, rhythmic beat against the roof. It was quiet. So incredibly quiet. I realized I hadn't had a stomachache in a month. The chronic tension headaches that had plagued my first life were entirely gone. I pulled up the local court docket online. Liam's name stared back at me in stark, black pixels. The plea deal had been rejected by the prosecutor. They wanted to make an example out of him. A brief, sharp pang of guilt flared in my chest. It was an old reflex, deeply ingrained. He's your little brother. You used to read him bedtime stories. You pushed him on the swings. I squeezed my eyes shut. I forced myself to remember the hospice ward. I forced myself to remember the smell of the bleach, the suffocating terror of my failing lungs, the sound of Liam complaining about the cost of parking at the hospital while I lay dying. The guilt evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. They had built this pyre themselves. I was just refusing to be the firewood. Winter broke into a muddy, bitter spring. The transition matched the decay of my former family. I saw my father in late March. It was an accident. I had driven to a bulk grocery store in the suburbs to buy supplies for my townhouse garden. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the warehouse hummed aggressively overhead. I turned down the frozen food aisle, my cart squeaking faintly, and stopped dead. Richard was standing in front of the frozen dinners. He looked diminished. The imposing, barrel-chested patriarch who used to dictate the emotional weather of our household looked like a deflated tire. His shoulders stooped under a faded windbreaker. His hair, usually neatly trimmed, was shaggy and graying rapidly at the temples. The skin around his eyes hung in dark, heavy folds. He picked up a box of generic Salisbury steak, stared at it blankly, and tossed it into his basket. There were no expensive cuts of meat, no imported beers, just survival food. He turned and saw me. For a long moment, the air between us froze. The background noise of the store, the clatter of carts, the beeping registers, seemed to fade out. I gripped the plastic handle of my cart, feeling the ridges press into my palms. He didn't yell. He didn't puff his chest out. He just looked at me with a profound, hollow exhaustion. He pushed his basket toward me, his shoes scuffing against the polished concrete floor. "Nora," he croaked. His voice lacked any of its old booming authority. It sounded like dry leaves scraping across pavement. "Richard?" I replied. Using his first name felt like a physical barrier sliding into place between us. He flinched. "Your mother isn't doing well. Her nerves are shot. She won't get out of bed most days." I said nothing. I didn't offer a polite platitude. I didn't ask what was wrong. I just stared at him, watching the erratic twitch of a muscle in his jaw. "Liam's sentencing is next week," he said, his eyes dropping to the floor. He couldn't meet my gaze. "The lawyer thinks he's going to get 5 years. Minimum security, but 5 years. It's going to destroy him." 5 years? The universe had a sick, beautiful sense of humor. 5 years was exactly how long I had survived in my first life, from the moment of Liam's arrest until my body finally gave out under the stress of their financial demands. He was getting my sentence. "He destroyed himself," I said quietly. My father looked up, a flash of the old defensive anger sparking in his tired eyes. "You could have stopped this. You had the money. You chose a house over your own flesh and blood." "I chose myself," I corrected him. I felt no anger now, only a deep, abiding pity. "You spent 26 years teaching me that my only value was what I could sacrifice for this family. When I finally said no, you threw me away without a second thought." "You didn't love me, Dad. You loved what I could do for you. And when I stopped doing it, I stopped being your daughter." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at his hands, thick and calloused, trembling slightly against the wire of his shopping basket. "Harper changed her number," he whispered, a sudden, tragic confession spilling out of him. "She moved. We don't know where she is. She won't talk to us either." Of course she didn't. Harper was a creature of comfort. The moment the family stopped being a source of pride and started being a liability, she amputated them just as cleanly as I had. The difference was, she did it out of sheer selfishness. I did it out of survival. "You reap what you sow, Richard," I said. I pushed my cart past him. I didn't look back. The scent of freezer frost and cheap cardboard faded as I walked toward the gardening section, toward bags of rich, dark potting soil and seeds. 2 weeks later, the final domino fell. I was sitting on my patio, drinking a glass of cheap wine and watching the early spring sun dip below the rooflines. My phone buzzed with a news alert from the local county blotter. I had set up a keyword notification months ago. Former financial advisor sentenced to 60 months in embezzlement case. I opened the article. There was a photo of Liam leaving the courthouse. He looked terrified. The arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by the wide, wet eyes of a boy who finally realized his parents couldn't shield him from the real world. The article noted that full restitution was ordered, an amount exceeding $70,000 with penalties. It mentioned that the defendant's family business, a local contracting firm, had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy earlier that week. They had lost the business. They had lost the golden boy. They had driven away their only other daughter. I locked my phone and set it down on the wrought iron table. The evening air smelled like damp earth and blooming jasmine. I took a sip of my wine. It tasted tart, complex, and perfect. They were ruined. The empire of manipulation they had built was entirely reduced to ash. And I was sitting here, in a home I owned, in a life I controlled, breathing air that belonged entirely to me. I had refused to catch them, and the impact of their fall was a sound I would cherish forever. August brought a heat wave that baked the city into a cracked, shimmering mirage. The air was thick enough to chew, smelling of hot asphalt and exhaust. I spent my weekends in the cool, air-conditioned sanctuary of my townhouse, watching the vines I had planted in the spring snake their way up the brick patio wall. My life was terrifyingly quiet. I had friends from the clinic, a routine, and a savings account that was slowly rebuilding itself. But the past always has a way of leaving a residual echo. The flyer was taped to a telephone pole near the grocery store in my old neighborhood. Bright neon pink paper, curling at the edges from the humidity. Estate and foreclosure liquidation sale. Everything must go. Below the bold print was the address of the house I grew up in. I shouldn't have gone. It was a masochistic impulse, a morbid curiosity to see the carcass of my childhood picked clean by strangers. But on Saturday morning, I found myself parking my Honda 3 blocks away and walking toward the familiar 2-story colonial. The lawn, once my father's pride and joy, was dead. Brown, brittle patches of crabgrass crunched beneath my sneakers. The front door was propped wide open, letting out the stale, trapped air of a house that had been suffocating. I stepped inside. The foyer smelled like old dust, floor wax, and the faint, unmistakable sourness of despair. The beige runner on the stairs had been ripped up, leaving behind rows of rusted staples and pale, unfinished wood. People, strangers in cargo shorts and sundresses, were swarming the rooms like locusts, holding clipboards and plastic shopping bags. I walked into the living room. The oriental rug was gone. The heavy oak bookshelves my father had built were empty, tagged with a neon green sticker that read, $150 OBO. A woman with aggressive perfume was inspecting my mother's beloved crystal decanter, holding it up to the light to check for scratches. My chest tightened. It wasn't regret. It was a bizarre, disjointed grief. I wasn't mourning the loss of the items. I was mourning the illusion they had represented. This was the set where we had played the roles of a happy, successful family. Now, the stage was being dismantled. I drifted into the kitchen. The faux granite island where I had drawn my line in the sand was covered in cheap Tupperware and mismatched flatware. "Nora?" The voice was thin, reedy, and scraped across the back of my neck like a rusted razor blade. I turned around. Standing near the back patio door was my aunt, my mother's sister, Carol. She was clutching a floral teacup, her eyes wide behind thick wire-rimmed glasses. "Hi, Carol," I said. My voice felt incredibly heavy, dragged up from the bottom of my lungs. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, looking around nervously as if expecting my parents to materialize from the drywall. "Barbara and Richard, they aren't here. They couldn't bear it. They moved into a little duplex off Route 9. "Just looking," I said flatly. Carol took a step closer. The smell of her peppermint hard candies and mothballs washed over me. "Your mother is a ghost, Nora. She doesn't speak. She just sits by the window. Richard is working the night shift at a lumber yard. A man his age, lifting heavy wood all night. His back is destroyed." The conditioning flared up. A sharp, physical ache bloomed behind my sternum. The urge to pull out my checkbook, to fix it, to ease the suffering of the man who had terrified me and the woman who had manipulated me. I dug my fingernails into the rough denim of my jeans until the pain grounded me. "That sounds difficult," I managed to say. The neutrality of the statement felt like swallowing glass. Carol's face flushed with sudden righteous indignation. "Difficult? It's a tragedy. And you're just standing there. You could have stopped this. Liam is in a cage. Your parents are ruined. How do you sleep at night?" I looked at the kitchen floor, right at the spot where my mother had dropped her dish towel on the day of the first ruin. I remembered the hospice room again. The cold, the silence. I looked back at Carol. I sleep on a very comfortable mattress, in a house I own, with money I earned, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but steady as bedrock. I didn't steal from an elderly woman. I didn't take out a second mortgage to hide a failing business. I just refused to drown with them. I walked past her. I didn't stop until I was out the front door, down the cracked driveway, and back in my car. My hands were shaking as I put the key in the ignition. I sat there for a long time, the engine off, the brutal August heat turning the cabin into an oven. Sweat beaded on my forehead and rolled down my neck. I let it burn. I let the discomfort sit with me. It wasn't a clean break. It never is. You don't just cut off your family and walk away into the sunset. You walk away limping, carrying the phantom pain of the severed limb. But as I finally turned the key and the AC blasted cool air against my damp skin, the air tasted sweet. I was limping, but I was walking in my own direction. 14 months passed. The seasons cycled through. I got a promotion at the clinic, moving from reception to office manager. I bought a real coffee maker instead of drinking burnt diner swill. I dated a guy named David for a few months, a nice, boring accountant who smelled like cedarwood and clean laundry, but I broke it off when I realized I was constantly waiting for him to ask me for money. The trauma ran deep, a subterranean river I was still learning to navigate. It was a Tuesday evening in late October. The wind outside was howling, stripping the last dead leaves from the oak trees lining my street. I was curled on the sofa, a heavy wool blanket over my legs, reading a paperback thriller. My cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed a toll-free number. I usually ignored them, but some deep primal instinct, made me press accept. Hello? An automated voice, perfectly cheerful and entirely soulless, filled the line. You have a prepaid collect call from an inmate at the Federal Correctional Institution. To accept, press 1. My breath stopped. The living room, with its warm lamplight and soft throw pillows, suddenly felt like a vacuum. My thumb hovered over the red end call button. Just hang up, just end it. But I didn't. My finger drifted, heavy and numb, and pressed the 1. A sharp click, followed by the heavy, static hiss of a secure line. Nora? It was Liam. But it wasn't the arrogant, booming voice of the golden boy. It wasn't the slick, confident cadence of a guy trying to sell biotech stocks over expensive lunches. It sounded like a hollowed-out shell of a human being. It sounded terrified. I'm here, I said. My voice was a tight wire. I could hear the background noise of the prison, echoing shouts, the clang of heavy metal doors, a chaotic, vibrating hum of trapped energy. It made my stomach churn. They let me use the phone, he choked out. The line crackled. He was crying. Not the performative, strategic tears he used in our parents' kitchen, but an ugly, wet, snot-nosed weeping. Nora, please don't hang up. Please. I'm not hanging up, Liam. What do you want? I need money, he blurted out, the words desperate and raw. Just commissary money. A couple $100. Mom and Dad can't send anything. They're broke, Nora. They don't even have a car anymore. I can't eat the food here, and I need to buy things. You need things in here to trade, to be safe. The fear in his voice was a tangible, heavy thing. It leaked through the phone speaker and pooled on my living room floor. He was begging. The brother who had mocked my job, who had sneered at my savings, was begging me for instant noodles and soap. Liam, I started, the old, conditioned guilt rising up like bile in my throat. I remembered him at 6 years old, running through the sprinklers in the backyard, laughing until he hiccuped. I remembered patching a scrape on his knee because our mother was too busy drinking wine on the patio. "Please," he sobbed. "I'm scared, Nora. I'm so fucking scared all the time. There are guys in here. I don't belong here. I made a mistake." "You didn't make a mistake," I said softly, the harsh truth cutting through his delusion. "You made a choice. You chose to steal." "I was going to put it back," he screamed, a sudden brief flash of his old entitlement breaking through the terror. "You know I was. If you had just given me the money, none of this would have happened. You did this to me." There it was, the core of his rot. Even now, locked in a federal cell, stripped of his suits and his dignity, he still believed the universe owed him a safety net. He still believed I was the villain for refusing to be his human shield. The guilt evaporated. The phantom image of the laughing 6-year-old vanished, replaced by the reality of the 24-year-old thief who would have gladly watched me work myself into an early grave to fund his lifestyle. "No, Liam," I said. My voice was steady, calm, and terrifyingly cold. "I didn't do this to you, and I'm not sending you a dime." "Nora, wait. Don't call me again. Lose this number. Serve your time." "Nora, please, don't leave me in here." I pulled the phone away from my ear. His desperate, pleading voice sounded tiny, like an insect trapped in a jar. I tapped the red button. The line went dead. I set the phone face down on the coffee table. I didn't cry. I pulled the wool blanket tighter around my shoulders, listening to the wind rattle the window panes. The house was warm. I was safe. And for the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like armor. October 12th, 2026. 5 years exactly since my rebirth. The exact day, in the first timeline, that my heart had finally given out in that sterile, bleach-scented room, while my sister complained about cafeteria coffee in the hallway. The body keeps the score, even across timelines. I woke up at 4:13 a.m., gasping, my hands clawing at my own throat. My pajamas were soaked in cold sweat. For 10 terrifying seconds, I couldn't pull oxygen into my lungs. I waited for the wet rattle. I waited for the agonizing pressure of my failing organs. Then, my vision cleared. The glowing red numbers of my digital alarm clock cut through the dark. I wasn't in a hospice bed. I was on a memory foam mattress. The air didn't smell like antiseptic and decay. It smelled like the lavender laundry detergent I had used the day before. I sat up, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes until sparks danced in my vision. I dragged myself out of bed and into the kitchen. I ground expensive, dark roast coffee beans. The loud, aggressive grinding noise helped drown out the phantom echo of a heart monitor flatlining in my ears. I drank the coffee black, standing barefoot on the cold hardwood floor, watching the neighborhood slowly wake up through the window. By noon, the quiet of my townhouse became suffocating. The walls felt like they were pressing inward. I needed motion. I needed noise to prove I was still part of the living world. I grabbed my keys, got into my car, and drove. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just let the muscle memory of the city guide me, navigating through the affluent suburbs, past the shiny strip malls, until the scenery began to degrade. The smooth asphalt gave way to potholes. The manicured lawns turned into cracked concrete and rusted chain-link fences. I didn't realize where my subconscious had steered me until my tires hit the rough, neglected pavement of Route 9. It was an industrial wasteland on the outskirts of the county, a place of cheap motels, flickering neon liquor store signs, and exhaust fumes. I pulled into the parking lot of the complex my Aunt Carol had mentioned. It was worse than I had imagined. The stucco on the buildings was peeling off in large, diseased-looking scabs. A discarded, rain-rotted mattress sat propped against a dumpster. The air smelled of diesel fuel, damp earth, and stale grease. I parked in a visitor spot across the lot, keeping the engine running. The AC hummed a low, steady note. I slouched down slightly in the driver's seat, watching the door to Unit 1B. I sat there for 30 minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. A stray, mangy cat picked its way across the cracked pavement. Somewhere a few units down, a television blared an afternoon game show. Then, the deadbolt on Unit 1B clicked loudly. The door stuck, jammed in the warped frame, and someone had to hit it hard from the inside to force it open. Richard stepped out. My breath hitched. I barely recognized the man standing on the tiny, cracked concrete slab. He looked like a deflated balloon. He was wearing faded gray sweatpants and a stained yellow undershirt that hung loosely on his frame. The barrel chest that used to physically intimidate me into submission was completely gone, replaced by a concave, hollowed-out posture. He was carrying a white plastic bag of trash. He stepped down off the curb, and I saw him wince, his hand instinctively flying to his lower back. Carol wasn't exaggerating. The night shifts at the lumberyard had physically broken him. Every step toward the dumpster looked like a calculated negotiation with pain. He hoisted the bag over the rusted rim of the dumpster. It landed with a dull, heavy thud. He didn't turn back immediately. He just stood there, leaning his weight against the dirty metal, staring blankly out at the highway traffic rushing by. His face was a map of profound, inescapable defeat. There was no trace of the arrogant patriarch who had roared at me in the kitchen. He was just a tired, broken old man waiting out the clock. The screen door to the unit screeched open. Barbara stepped out. She was wearing a faded pink bathrobe, the hem dragging slightly on the dirty concrete. Her hair, once her meticulously styled armor, was a thin, unkempt nest of gray and faded blonde. She didn't look at Richard. She pulled a pack of cheap cigarettes from her pocket, her hands trembling slightly as she struck a lighter. She inhaled deeply, closing her eyes as if the smoke was the only thing holding her together. They stood 10 feet apart, completely silent. They were trapped together in the purgatory they had built. Two parasites left with nothing to feed on, but each other's misery and regret. I watched them from the safety of my air-conditioned car. I waited for the vindication. I waited for the triumphant rush of victory. That cinematic surge of justice that movies promised. It never arrived. Instead, a vast, heavy emptiness settled in my stomach. They weren't monsters anymore. They weren't towering figures capable of destroying my life with a single demand. They were just sad, small people who had made terrible, selfish choices, and the bill had finally come due. I shifted my foot on the brake. I put the car in reverse. The transmission clunked loudly in the quiet parking lot. Richard's head snapped up at the sound. He looked across the lot, his faded eyes squinting against the harsh afternoon glare. For a split second, the distance evaporated. Our eyes met through the windshield. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away, and I didn't hide. I held his gaze, letting him see the woman I had become. I let him see the reliable car, the clean clothes, the unbothered posture. I wasn't the terrified, compliant girl he had tried to bleed dry. I was a stranger who had survived him. I saw the exact moment recognition clicked in his brain. His posture didn't stiffen with anger. He didn't yell. Instead, a deep flush of shame crept up his neck. His shoulders slumped even further, as if an invisible weight had just been dropped on his back. He looked away first. He turned his back to me and began the slow, agonizing shuffle back to his dingy apartment. I drove out of the complex, my tires crunching over broken glass, and merged onto the highway. I rolled the windows down. The cold October wind whipped through the cabin, freezing my cheeks and tangling my hair. The smell of diesel faded, replaced by the crisp, sharp scent of autumn leaves. I took my right hand off the steering wheel and pressed it flat against my chest, right over my sternum. Beneath my ribs, my heart beat against my palm with a strong, steady, violent rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. I was alive. The cost of my survival had been my family. I had amputated them without anesthesia, leaving them to drown in the flood of their own making. I am a harder person now. I trust slowly. I analyze every favor asked of me. I carry the phantom scars of my past life like a hidden, heavy coin in my pocket. But as I pressed the accelerator, heading back to my warm house, my quiet life, and the future that belonged entirely to me, I knew the absolute truth. I would do it all again. Thank you for staying with Nora through this grueling journey of survival and boundary setting. If her story of escaping a toxic family and reclaiming her life resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm push this to others who might need the courage to walk away. Drop a comment below. Did Nora make the right call at the end, or was she too harsh? Don't forget to share this video with a friend and subscribe to the channel for more raw, unapologetic Reborn stories every single week.